gamers? It's Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and you didn't think I was going to go a whole season of this podcast without talking to Jason Perez, did you?
Hey, Jason. No, sir. We are back. Liz and Jason are back. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Happy to be on Beyond Solitaire podcast for my 5th season running.
Yes, yeah, you're one of the. There's 2 people who have been on every single season. It's you and David Thompson.
That's it.
I just pencil y'all in at the beginning. Now it's like planning for next season.
Right.
David, Jason, somewhere.
And we were going to talk about Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is hitting shelves. I don't know when this episode is landing, sometime in October. Puerto Rico will be available. Puerto Rico 1897, the new Puerto Rico in October. However, right now, Robertsburger is coordinating all of the press for that particular project. So go check out BGG for Eric's article, Eric Martin. I don't remember these names. We have a front page article on BGG. Also, there'll be an article on Polygon coming up. So that's kind of, the official line. So we wanted to do something a little bit different with this episode. So I'll go ahead. I'm not going to step on your hosting stuff. Go ahead. Go for it.
I mean, honestly, we're at the point where it's just like a conversation anyway, like a check-in.
That's
but
true.
Yeah, we were going to talk about Puerto Rico, but we had to pivot. But I'm actually curious about this anyway. You've been working as a cultural consultant a lot, and yes. I wanted to talk to you about how that experience has been. How long have you been doing this now, and how much of your work life is this taking up at this point? Because I feel like it's a lot.
I mean, so I've been working as a cultural consultant, but I'm not working as much as I want to. So, so I have been, so what a cultural consultant is someone who is contacted by a company. We make an interface somehow, and I look at their game, and I check for cultural issues, things that could potentially be trouble, things that enter the blind spots of publishers. So I open this up right away. This is like, no one is accusing anybody of being intentionally racist, sexist, homophobic, all that kind of stuff. But stuff sneaks in. Not everybody has the right requisite life experience. So, you always could use a different perspective. I've been doing this stuff for years and years. And in the board gaming space, I've been doing it for since early 2021. So, that's when I kind of, brought my bad year blimp into the board gaming space. Okay. I mean, I first did my Puerto Rico video, the very, very first one, the critique, in January 2021. I started to contacted Alea in, April. Like, that's when we got together. And then maybe around, June, July, same thing, 2021, Chip Theory got in touch with me to look at their stuff. So then that's when it clicked. It was like, wow, these are big companies. Let me try to make this a real thing. So yeah, I have a website. It's not great, but I have a website. You can go check it at shelfstoriesgbl.org or .com. Sorry. Well, shelfstoriesgbl.com. You can go ahead and check that out. Drop an email. And if you are a publisher or if you think a project needs a look, so I will either give a check, I charge a flat fee, give a check, give my thoughts, and boom, done. Or I can work with you on overall thematic development. So like if you're re-theming a game, and I've worked on a couple of those, like with Puerto Rico, there's a couple that are coming that are like, this game already exists. And it's like, oh, no one's going to buy this now. Mores have changed. So I can help you with that. My motto, I do not want to shame and blame. More games, more history, more diversity in games, not less. So I run the gamut. So I run the gamut. Either I'll, just a brief check and a brief consult, or I will work with you and help you make your game more culturally resonant and at the same time cool. I don't believe in uncool games. I believe in cool games. So there you go.
Yeah, we definitely agree on that. So out of curiosity, do you have to actually play a game in order to be able to culturally consult on it? Like, do you need a whole prototype, or do you sometimes just check rule books? Like, how much of a game do you need to see in order to assess, especially if something might not be super obvious?
You got to play it. You got to play it. Because I like to say that games have 2 different narratives. Games have the narrative that is said, and the game that has the narrative that emerges, right? So, I mean, I'll take the example of Puerto Rico. I'm not going to speak about it too much, but you have your basic thing of this is what's happening. This is the little brown chips, the plantations, and that's kind of bad enough. But then when you play it, you realize that, wait a minute, I'm putting the chips on the ship. And I'm bringing the ship in, and I'm physically putting the chips, I'm physically assigning the things. And that just gives it an extra level of grossness that's where people have that visceral response. So like I get that question a lot. Why Puerto Rico? Why is this such a big deal? Why isn't Raiders of the North Sea a big deal? You're killing that game too. Why isn't Feast for Odin such a big deal? Vikings are bad. You're killing that game too. Why isn't Pirates a big deal? You're killing that game too. So there are certain games that, because of the mechanism in themselves, they kind of like put you an extra level into the grossness that like, and that won't emerge unless you actually, get your hands on the thing and play it.
That's fair. The other question I kind of had is that, okay, so you also make just regular gaming media. You do playthroughs, and I don't know if do you review at this point? Or just playthroughs?
It's very, my reviews are very, very down. It's if I'm gonna do something that's just like for funsies, then I'm gonna do playthroughs. I mean, I piss people off enough with my cultural consulting. I don't want to piss people off with my reviews either. People don't like when I have opinions or whatever it is. Like, you know what? I'm taking that out of my life. Playthroughs. That's it. Just enjoy. And then people
step on the gas, Jason.
And then people nitpick the rules, and so I can't avoid criticism anyway. But oh my god. Whatever.
Fair enough. But I guess my question is, so if you've covered something as a cultural consultant, like, does that affect the kind of coverage that you do for a game in other spheres of your gaming media life?
I will not review a game that I consult for. I'll feature it. I'll play it. I'll do a playthrough of it, and I'll let people, decide for themselves. And I wear my emotions on my sleeve. If I'm not like super jazzed about a game, I'm just gonna play it, and you'll know. Or if I'm like super, I get into it, and it's like, okay, I'm clearly enjoying myself. So like, I don't fake that. Like that an hour of faking I'm enjoying stuff is really hard, and I have no interest in that. So that, I mean, like, so my quote unquote opinion will emerge in the playthrough, but I'm not going to sit there like kind of giving a analysis of the game, because I don't like, it's different brains. I've already kind of, and plus if I'm contributed to it,
Right.
So most of the games that I've consulted for they've been a change. It's very rare that, someone who cares enough to have the game looked at where it's just like completely, utterly fine and unscathed. Usually they have a question, and people's instincts are okay. Like they're thinking like, oh, this isn't quite okay, but let me double check. And I double check. It's like, yeah, that's not okay. So then they change it. So like, I'm already involved in the process. So how can I give I'm attached. So, and right. I'm very clear about, I'm very transparent. It's like, okay, this is what I take a little picture, I put it on my video. This is my name in the rule books. I'm looking at Burn Cycle right now. My name is in the Burn Cycle rule book, and whatever else is coming down. So I will feature it, but review it, give my opinions. There's plenty of other people that you can go to for that.
That's fair enough. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. I just always wonder how this works, and especially as I've started to do tutorials for chip theory. So, I've been doing all these tutorials for Too Many Bones. I reviewed Hoplo Victorum, but I also put a giant disclaimer on the front because, like, I still have opinions. I thought Burn Cycle was decent and the Hoplo Victorum was great. So, right. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite. I thought Burn Cycle was great and Hoplo was decent.
Yeah, I mean, like the opinions still come out, but yeah, how do you flag it is always the question. And then I guess, okay, so you mentioned like talking about things like not okay, having a sense of what's not okay, changing it. What happens when you are brought onto a project and you give feedback, and the person that you are giving that feedback to, like, maybe doesn't seem to understand or hear you, or doesn't take all of it? Like, is the expectation that somebody's going to take all your feedback? Like, how do you negotiate something that's that hard already about topics that are so sensitive?
So you asked a very interesting question, Liz. It's the big question. The big question that is involved in cultural consulting. This is not easy work. Part of it is knowledge. I think as a teacher, right? I mean, like, you can have the knowledge, right? And that is fine on one level. But then there's your ability to impart that knowledge onto students, which is a very taken for granted skill, because that's why in America we don't respect teachers, because we don't respect that as a skill. Because you have to overcome certain tendencies. I know, like, as a teacher, you're looking at kids, you can kind of read what you can get away with and what you can't.
Yeah, and they're doing it too.
And what will fly and what will not. So you're adjusting, right? So it's like, okay, I was going to do a lesson this way, and now let me do it that way, because they won't vibe with this one thing, but I think this other thing will have a chance. So in a way, because this is an educational process, teaching people how to think more culturally resonantly, then it's kind of a similar deal where it's like I have to kind of read the situation and pitch myself to be able to impart whatever information I have without in a way that'll be received. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
So, and the biggest thing here is to, like I think you were alluding to this, people feel attacked, and that's the biggest thing, right? That's that's why the internet sucks, because it's a giant field where people make each other feel attacked, because that's how you get attention. So it's when people feel attacked and in that defensive crouch, they're not gonna listen, and they're gonna judge, and they're gonna be defensive and everything. So I in my videos and also in the consulting, I bend over backwards to say, like, you know what, this isn't about personal attack. This is just blind spots. This is there are certain things, certain ways in which POC, women, LGBTQ have presented themselves in the culture. There's a lot of stereotypes there.
Yeah.
Not every girl has an hourglass figure and a little and a butts and all that kind of thing. That is not the only kind of woman that needs to appear in a game. So it's just, but that's the cultural thing. That's what we're used to as a culture. So I consistently, right? So that's the very beginning. The very beginning is to let people know that this isn't personal. This is not a personal attack. This is to make this is helping you see what we see, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And making your product better. I like to say I also put it in terms of money and press. Like, consult with me now might cost a little bit, but think of the money and time you'll save on the back end because you avoided a problem. And people don't understand that. People are that's what a lot of people are afraid of. They're afraid of, like, they release something and then they're not talking about the thing, they're talking about the controversy that the thing generated. And that takes so much time. And it's like, I'm a person in a constructive way that can help you avoid that pitfall.
So I want to get back to this larger discussion, but this does lead to another question for me, which is, do you ever feel like you're just being asked to rubber stamp something so that white people can release it and like feel good about it? And how do you handle that? Like, you're working in a professional context, right? You have clients, they paid you, you have to do the service on some level, I guess. Like, at what point do you walk away? What happens if it's just not working?
Okay. So I actually have a list of 4 things that I've encountered in particular, and you just hit on one of them. So I'll skip right to that one. So in my cultural consulting, and this is for any, because I know publishers listen to this, and whoever's watching this on Shelf Stories. So again, not personal, but these are trends that I've noticed, that we've been educated in, socialized in, and something to be aware of. So again, not attacking anybody. But I do encounter certain issues, and you just put your finger on one of the biggest issues that I encounter, which is, I call it the trust me paradigm. So you're brought in to consult, or I'm brought in to consult, but the creator is still kind of claiming that authority. It's my game. I have the expertise. Thank you very much for your input. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to compromise my vision where I don't think I need to compromise it. So I've encountered that in many different flavors, many different areas. And so this is where I'm gonna get a little bit spicy, but I'm just gonna go for it because I want to be
gotta
honest.
get my spice this way because I can't eat it. I get ulcers. So.
Do not tell a white person that they can't do something. Do not tell a white person that they can't be the best at something. That is something that white folks have been acculturated on. Again, this isn't genetic, this is cultural. This is the way that folks are socialized, where you could do anything and you could excel at anything. And here I am saying, well, you cannot excel at telling a woman-centric story if you're a white man. A woman will tell that story better. You cannot excel at telling an Egyptian-centered, a Caribbean-centered. You literally cannot excel at that, not because of any kind of limitation, not because you're terrible and racist or whatever it is, just because there are people with life experience every single day they're living this stuff that are going to tell that story in a more authentic way. Not necessarily better, but definitely more authentic. And that's what a lot of people want. They want that authenticity. When something's truly authentic, that'll sell. Right? When something feels good, that will sell. And I think there are white creators out there that, they want to give that. So, like, they're making an Egyptian game. It's like, okay, it's Egyptian. I'm going to throw some pyramids on there. And it's like, okay, that becomes like a one-to-one. Or I actually had this situation. Someone was making a game in, the Southwest Mexico area, and everyone in the art had sombreros. And I was like, okay, can we take a look at this? And the person's like, isn't that what Mexico is all about? There's, doesn't everybody wear a sombrero? No, no, that's Speedy Gonzalez stuff. I mean, that's where you got it. So, and there was a process of like, again, when I made that observation, the person felt attacked. Like, well, what are you saying? And are you this and are you that? And I had to go through the whole thing. And that can go either way. Sometimes the person listens, but sometimes somebody will pull the card, right? I am making this thing, so I have the authority. And that's where, like, and I had that one for actually a big project. I'm not going to say what the big project is, but, I was introduced to the person, and the person was, they had their vision for the game, and I'm looking at the game, and I'm giving my opinions. And there were some issues with this game. And I got the I'll take it under advisement thing. You know what that means. So I'll do the consult. I've done the initial consult, and then at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm at the point right now where I have a little bit of notoriety in the space. I don't need to be attached to things where I don't need to be attached to. So then I'm gonna apart from this. So now that becomes an issue because I could be giving up something. And there are a lot of other people in the space, or they may be in other areas of life, where if they don't attach themselves as a token, then opportunities will close. So there's very much a temptation to go along, to be like, all right, well, at least my name is attached to this thing. This will open doors for me, and I'm going to go progress to the next thing. And right. I can't blame an individual person for making that judgment. I cannot. I just, for me and for where I am right now, and for that particular issue of the trust me, I have the authority. I have final say over how my game looks and feels. I'm gonna make the personal decision to step away.
Yeah. And like what's hard about that too is that's such a slippery thing, because I mean, I know that whenever I make a statement or come in hot about something, right? Like on a very technical level, like that is someone else's game, and they are going to publish it the way they want to. Mm-hmm. Like, what if they get two cultural consultants who disagree? What if it's a very subjective thing and you're just wrong? Like, how do you even navigate that? You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it would be really hard.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so this is a thing I encounter on the publisher side and on the audience side,
right?
That we're like the Politburo. The culture consultant is like, papers, please. You give me your thing, and I determine whether it's acceptable or not. And I could I wield some sort of a outside authority, moral authority, shaming authority. That's how I kind of I'm able to be the boss over these things. People can do whatever they want. It's about reception. At the end of the day, I think there are creators who just want to make their game and be free of consequences. And so that's another very, very much baked in part of white culture, is this assumption that, free speech, right? Free speech means I can say whatever I want. And it doesn't. It does not mean that.
Yeah,
that
I mean, processed. You can say whatever you want, but people are going to have thoughts about you and react to you.
So can I. That's what free speech means. You can say whatever you want. I can say whatever I want. And then there is a persuasion battle. So then what free speech rejects is coercion. Free speech rejects, government coming in and and exerting force. But if a project is, whatever it is that you have your free speech, I'm not going to cancel it. Like, I don't want to hear anything about cancellation. Like, publish whatever you want. What I'm pointing out is that you can't stop the free speech of other people too. So that's the move. The move is to say that person can say whatever they want. All criticism of culture is invalid, and so whatever. Like, now you're suppressing my free speech, and now you're suppressing the free speech of people who are, watching this stuff. And I'm good at this. Like, I think my background as a psychotherapist also helps, because I have a lot of empathy. I've met a lot of different people. I'm always meeting people all over the place, so I get a sense for how people think, how people will receive stuff. And so if I note something that's like, okay, that's an issue. And that's nothing. A good point about cultural consultants disagreeing. Yes, I don't think a cultural consultant, a really good one, will be prescriptive. will say, okay, I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't think this is whatever. It'll be more like, okay, this group of people might take this way,
Okay.
or that
Mhm.
group of people might take this that way. And I'm hopeful that, consultants will agree. So it's like
Right.
maybe the consultant personally be like, okay, that seems pretty good, but you might want to check that with that other perspective. So it isn't like, it's just like, okay, here's my opinions. It's not about my
Mhm.
opinions. I try to take that out as much as I can, even though you can't truly. I'm always going to have some perspectives, but I think there's a bigger thing here. Then the bigger thing is different sectors of the audience and how they'll respond to it. So then getting back to the original thing of like, okay, the creator can make whatever they want. Well, then people can say whatever they want. And if you want to ensure that your product is received
Right.
in the best light, what's the point of making a game? The point of making a game is you want people to play it. And theoretically, you want people from a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences to play it. So that's the flag. It's like, okay, do you want this audience to play it? Do you want that audience to play it? Do you want that audience to feel seen? Do you want that audience to feel like the representation here is for them? And not everybody wants that. So it's like, okay, fine. So, okay, I got you the consult. I gave you the flag. Now you're prepared. Put your game with your 5 white males as the leads, put it out there and see what happens. Or the one woman with a chainmail bikini. I deal with a lot of chainmail bikinis. Seriously.
That should just be obvious by now, but so that actually leads to my next question though, because my instincts, well, that should just be obvious by now. I think maybe it just isn't to some people. But so you mentioned trying to approach people with compassion and try not to judge them. Like it seems like a lot of this is getting your point across to your clients while also like handling their feelings
Yes.
delicately.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm sure that frustrates you. Do you ever feel like this is a line of work that can do harm to the person doing it? Because you are essentially putting yourself in a role where you have to humor someone that, I mean, when we talk about, being a more diverse society and actually listening, a lot of messaging that I get on Twitter is like, white people need to know that they need to take themselves out of the conversation, decenter yourself, shut up, let people be angry in the way that they want to be angry and quit trying to tone police people. Like, so from my end, like what I learn, right, is that it's not all about me and that I need to like just listen to other people expressing their feelings as they see fit. But that's not what can happen in the way that you're doing this work because somebody paid you to help them do better. So like how does that work? And like what's the emotional impact on you?
So dealing with white people feelings is part of the deal when you are a POC and you want to get somewhere, and so there's so many people, I was talking to a Asian DM for one of my dungeon master in D&D for one of my podcasts, and on down the line, and that's what we deal with in a context, which is we call it emotional labor. We are explaining, but then we're taking on the emotional labor of not making people feel attacked, because white people are educated. Again, not all white people, right? I'm gonna get that comment. I've gotten that comment 6,000 times. Not all white people. If you check out of this yourself, then thank you very much. But it is a cultural tendency, and when something happens over and over and over and over and over again, and I don't see it challenged very much, then I'm just gonna make the generality, right? So the hardest thing to deal with is the extra level. You explain, but then there's this extra level of like the person has their feelings triggered and they feel attacked. And now you have to do the 10x emotional labor of explaining it in a way that will give access and create the change that you're looking to create. So yes, so you put it in terms of like, can that be harmful? I mean, I guess. I mean, I do not recommend this work for a lot of people. There's a lot of people who've gotten pissed off trying to explain the perspective, and it's like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I think for me, I have a mission. My mission is change. My mission, like I know how important representation is, and there are people who don't know, but I know because people like things that are familiar. We're having representation battles as we speak with the black elves and the Puerto Rican elves and the black mermaid. And why are these fights important? I think most people don't really get why they're important. They just like, whoa, they're this and that, and they're important because people gravitate towards what is familiar And if the culture, the center of the culture, we're talking like very central cultural products, has faces that look familiar, then other people from other marginalized backgrounds will feel more welcome in the center of the culture. That's just the way it is. And all humans are like this. White people too. White people want to see familiar things. Black people want to see familiar things. This is human. This isn't political. It's human. So, and I use this thought experiment every single time. I was like, okay, well, the source material is white. Tolkien was white. It was a white thing. So you're violating the source material by making a different kind of elf besides the white elf. Well, it's like, okay, I get that white people want to be seen in their fiction. Well, then give back Jesus. Jesus is a brown dude. And what would happen if brown Jesus all of a sudden became the icon of the land? What would happen if your ye old Southern Baptists down there, or the Catholics up in these other places? What if all of a sudden we just like we woke up one day and it was brown Jesus? Would the white people flip out, or would they say, "Oh, I don't see race; it doesn't matter"?
I think that they want to tell everyone else that Jesus is there for everybody and it doesn't matter what he looks like, but if you changed it, you would get a response. Let's put it that way.
And I'm not saying that's like bad. I'm saying that's human. So we're all having a human response to what we see. We just want to see familiar things. Right? So that's our point. But then we have to deal with the emotional labor of white folks in the middle who take that as an attack, who take that as replacement, like we want to replace white people. That's the big things. Like, I had they were about a video about replacement theory. And that's a big thing among, white cultures. Like they're replacing us. They're replacing us. Whenever we want to see this, we don't want to see that. Do you know how many shows there are? Like we have thousands of shows. Wanting 5, representative POC is not going to replace anybody. And can dealing with all those feelings cause harm? Of course. It's exhausting. It's being constantly misinterpreted. That's the harm. What you're constantly misinterpreted when I'm speaking my truth and my truth becomes, perverted and it becomes warped and it goes to that culture war mill and it comes out as, well, they want to replace white people. They want to divide stuff. And it was like, that's exhausting. That can do harm. But I have a mission. This is important. So I do what and so this podcast like this helps because it helps to talk about it and it helps to, foreground these issues, so that's kind of thank you very much, Liz. You're my medicine.
Oh, I appreciate that. So you and I are both, I have another question. You and I are both history buffs.
Yes.
And I think I know your answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I think it's valuable to discuss, which is,
have you the answer to all these things. It's just...
have you ever gotten to a point where there's a conflict between historical reality and the recommendations of your cultural consultation?
No. I'm a little bit unique in this regard, I guess. I'm not sure because I do respect history so much. I'm a firm believer where if there's a conflict, the answer to that is deeper, more intense study of history. History is so big, human culture is so big. If you dig deep enough, you'll find something that will answer your problem. So, okay, perfect example, the Puerto Rico example. When I first looked at the game and I wanted to kind of explore a retheme, I knew that people would want Puerto Rico to stay agricultural and stay historical, right? That couldn't just make Planeta Rico in space. They did that to Mombasa. People didn't like it. Because it's not about, like, people want a certain kind of sensibility when they go to the table. And, contrary to the idea that theme doesn't matter, it does in the sense of creating a vibe. People want to sit down. They want to have that historical tourism, warm, fuzzy, go over them. It feels good to play in these historical things. So Puerto Rico wanted to generate that. So I could have made something up because Puerto Rican agricultural history is difficult. We've been a colony forever. And we've always, basically always, our economy has always been under the charge of somebody else. Whether it was the Spanish or the Americans or what have you. So I could have, taken that off ramp, but I said, you know what? Let me keep looking. Let me keep digging. And I was able to dig far enough to find this reality, 1897, between sort of the Spanish and the Americans. I was able to find farmers who were independent and who did for themselves. And that's the story I wanted to tell. So I was able to do both. I was able to do a historical truth and something that was culturally resonant. So did I, am I skipping on some stuff? Sure. I don't want any colonialism in the game. But did I achieve a perspective that is historical and culturally resonant? Well, yeah. Because I grew up or my grandma had a farm and I went there for summers, and we didn't talk about colonialism all day. We didn't sit there like miserable. I can't believe we're colonists. No, human beings are bigger than that. So like I took from my experience and took from the history, and I made something that is definitely culturally resonant. The only people who have a problem with it are the people who like want misery in the game. So I don't have anything to, I've talked to those people, but I don't believe that is a legitimate perspective. So yeah, I mean, I think that to answer your original question, with more work, with more history, with more ability to kind of shift perspective and explore the perspective of alternative actors in history, I think you could figure out a way.
Right. So there's two things kind of going on here as I read that answer. One is actually what Amabel Holland said in her first time on the show. When you are doing history, there's two stories. There's a history story, and then there's a story that you're telling about yourself.
Right.
And those are the two twin narratives that go in. But also that finding another perspective, another kind of agency, and another kind of joy in history, that's not lying about history. Just right. Because something sucked doesn't mean that everything sucked, or that everybody was miserable, or that you can only tell the same sad story again and again and again.
Right.
You can free yourself from that.
Right. And there's a danger in that. Like you don't want to whitewash history. And I've gotten I don't think it's ultimately valid, but I can see where people are coming from, where what I did with Puerto Rico 1897 by putting happy farmers in the cover, I kind of dodged, and I whitewashed. I do not accept the idea that I put more brown people in the game and it's called a whitewash. So let's just put that out there first of all. But am I dodging the real issues? No, because I recognize that the game engine is a farming engine. So I did an interview with Andre Mack, who's in charge of Alea. If you want to know more, about the official Alea perspective, I work with them, go ahead and check out an article on Polygon. And we were talking, Andre and I, on that very interview. And I said, it's like, this is not a colonization game. This is a farming game. And he's like, yep, we don't want colonization. We never want a colonization. But there's a segment in the audience that wants colonization and that thinks it needs to be there. And it doesn't. So finding the perspective that says what you want. If you want to make a colonization game, the makers of Endeavor Age of Sail, I had them on the show. They're going to be on the show in a couple of months. They want a colonization game. Like that game is a colonization. That game can't be rethemed to anything else because they built it from the ground up. Right. And they were like, okay, and they knew how bad colonization was, but I think they thought they can get away with like people being kind of sardonic about it, the way they play Nazis. And it turns out that no, you can't do that. And there's a really key point, really, really key point that I think a lot of, again, white culture don't understand. So like in terms of the further barriers to, people who are like, why is this a problem? Colonization is ongoing. Colonization is today. So from a white person perspective, a white culture perspective, again, not all white people, but from a white culture perspective, like killing is killing, bad actions are bad actions. You're either good or you're bad. Right. And it's like, okay, if I'm going to be a bad guy, then I'm going to be a bad guy. And it's just a game, whatever. And for us, that's not true because some bad stuff is in the past, dead, gone, whatever. Like Rome, a lot of stuff that happened in Rome, we don't have legacy of like the Visigoths. They're not claiming, we've been oppressed by Western culture for however many years. No, they assimilated into Rome and there we go. So then, or like, the different barbarian tribes, which I know you're researching.
Yes. It's an upcoming project that maybe we'll get to talk about next season.
Absolutely. So then, but the project there was assimilation, and assimilation more or less happened. Right? You don't have people that are claiming that heritage. In the, Latino context, our colonization started 500 years ago, and it is still going. And that's a different thing. That is a whole different thing. And if you don't know, you don't know. So you're just going to make a game about it. But if you do know, then it's going to press a wound that has not healed because they keep opening it. Right. So like 1492, Columbus comes over. By 50 years later, the island is wiped out. 90% of the native population is wiped out and enslaved and all this other stuff. Okay. So then did that end? Is that a one-time deal? No. Right now, as we speak, we're speaking on September 24th. My island is without power. Parts of it are underwater because of a hurricane, a Category 1 hurricane, which Category 1 hurricane is not that strong, so it theoretically should not have dealt such devastation. But because we are a colonized land, because that colonizing has not ended for 500 years, we're in the situation that we're in, and we're being dismissed. There was more coverage of the Queen's funeral. Way more coverage of the Queen's funeral. There was way more coverage of a spider crawling on the casket than there was of 3 million people losing power and losing drinkable water. 3 million Americans, I should say. So the instinct on white culture be like, oh, the poor Browns, and even the stronger instinct is, oh, they can't take care of themselves. That's too bad. They have corruption. They have whatever. You look deeper, and it's like, no, we've been a colony for 500 years. So like we've been put under the thumb and not able to develop and do for ourselves because of the thumb on us that started 500 years ago, that old Puerto Rico whitewashed. And so there's no education, there's no ability for people to understand that. So like, and this includes publishers, to get back to what we're talking about. Publishers don't have the historical perspective of respecting the ongoing colonization, the ongoing oppression of marginalized peoples. They don't understand. So, shifting the conversation over to women, they don't understand what it is to be a woman and what it is to be catcalled wherever you go, to be not taken seriously in higher levels of academia and business and government, all that kind of thing. And that's ongoing. Women know this, but men don't, because they don't experience that. So you need a woman, you need someone with that perspective. You need someone empathetic to clue you in that, like, do not touch issues of ongoing oppression in your game. Even though you think it's a past, the past is present for a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's true for me, like the distant past is present. Actually, for one last kind of serious segment of this podcast before we get into just in the chat.
Sure.
I've talked about this. We've talked about this on Face Chat before, but like you mentioned Egyptian games a lot. And I think that's probably because you're talking to me. Like something that I have an interest in that. So my PhD is in ancient Christianity. I'm an academic expert on church history. My specific area of expertise is the Coptic church in Egypt. I wrote my dissertation about Coptic monks. Mm-hmm. I'm also a white woman and an atheist who lives in America. So I would love to make a game about Coptic monks, maybe about finding the sayings of the Desert Fathers, or about like a battle for supremacy between the nuns and the leader of a monastery, which is something that really happened that I find really fascinating. Mm-hmm. But I also ask myself the question, like, is it okay for me to make a game like this? Because there are also practicing Copts today who engage with that literature. There's a Pope Shenouda a little while back, and that's my dude too. And my perspective on the Coptic church and the happenings therein is going to be wildly different from somebody who's like coming at it from, I grew up in this church perspective, but maybe I didn't read all of the letters and sermons and whatever of Shenouda. Like, how do I navigate that? Like, I do feel like I have expertise to talk about that, if that makes sense. At the same time, I'm really aware that my expertise does not reflect the lived experience of people who are actually being Copts in Egypt.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'm gonna call out a little bit of white people framing.
Yeah, it's fine.
Is it okay? Is it okay for me to do X? Is it okay for me to do Y? That's very moralistic, and it plays into the white culture preoccupation with feelings and with judgments. And yeah, of course it's okay. Depending on what you want to do, right? Depends on what your goal is. So tell me what. So the is it okay question, and like okay, not okay. That's, to me, sterile. I have to know what your goal is. I have to know what you want to do. I have to know why you want to do it, right? So if you want to do it because you have a perspective, you have something to say, you're really strongly about it, and whatever it is, then you're going to do it. You're going to get criticism, and you're just to stand by it, and that's fine. right? And I've met those type of people. It's like, you know what, if that's what you really want to do, I mean, as an example, I consulted on Brazil Imperial. So Brazil Imperial is a game about basically you're a monarch in Brazil and you're building up a Brazil 4X at Euro style. And the original person who made the game is a Brazilian person, but they're like kind of a restorationist monarchist. So then their perspective is, the monarchy is great and let's harken back to when Brazil was a monarchy and all that kind of thing. Loves Jair Bolsonaro for like being a strong man who wants to, recall back to it. So I didn't consult with that person directly, but I consulted with Portal Games who picked up the larger, wider distribution of it. And there's no helping that game. Like that person has a perspective. They're going to put out what they're going to put out. They don't care who it pisses off. They don't care that they've reduced the entire African tribes to like a tile. You turn it over and you get 3 fruit. Like that's the entire representation of African peoples, even though there's millions of them and there've always been millions of them. And there's a long tradition of rebellion and resistance. No, now they're down to a tile. And so on and on and on, right? And so like indigenous peoples, the only indigenous person in that game was a famous sellout who, sold out his tribe to the monarchy in order for them, in order for that they're to achieve that political perspective. So that person had a perspective and they wanted to make their game and they're not changing it. They were challenged on it and they came into forums and they said, I'm not changing this. I'm not going to cave to the wokeness, all that kind of stuff. So that person found a publisher, made their game, and they stuck with it. So
yeah, but that's not the narrative that I want to embody in my own life.
Okay, but I'm saying it's like, okay, people ask, is it okay? Is it not okay? What I'm trying to do. I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm saying like
right.
That's a way to go. It's a way to go. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up writing kind of a paragraph in the beginning of the rule book that says this is not the only perspective. Like, know this perspective. It is popular in Brazil. There's a lot of people feel this way. Please educate yourself further about, other perspectives, indigenous resistance, African resistance, etc. That's the best you can do, right? So you can come in there with that attitude. And honestly, like white folks have the privilege of being able to do that. There's this instinctual fear that you're going to get canceled or you're going to get, yelled at and whatever, but that's your fear. If you really wanted to jam something through, you could probably do it. And so is it okay? Not okay. For me, from my perspective, there's all sorts of things that are not okay for me and I can't jam it through. I don't have that cultural cachet, but there's a lot of white folks out there that can jam anything through that they want to. So for me, that question kind of like, you don't know what it means for something to be really okay or not okay. Because there are walls when it comes to POC stuff that really don't exist. It's mostly social and emotional when it comes to what white people think are okay and not okay. So that's number one. I know that's a little bit of a subtle point, but I hope that people kind of process that a little bit.
I'm good with it. Like we've talked about, we just come up through this podcast. I think it's fine to call it out. It's important actually. So yeah.
So the okay, not okay framing, if that's your approach, then please reconsider that. And the more fruitful approach is how will this project land with people? Ask it in a more kind of open perspective where it's like you see your game in the context of the gaming ecosystem, right? As opposed to seeing it as a binary, plus, minus, good or bad. It's like, okay, this game is in the ecosystem. Most games probably could be made. I'm fine with that. So what will my game do in the gaming ecosystem? That's a much more valuable question for me. So, okay, what will your Coptic game from a white lady atheist in Atlanta, Georgia, what will that do in the gaming ecosystem? So, I mean, what can it do? What could be your blind spots? So then I can almost guarantee that you're going to have blind spots because you come in with maybe like a feminist read of stuff. So then, or like, what white American feminist read, and they have their own perspective. So then you're going to make your game about nuns rebelling against their male monk, whatever. And it's not going to, like there might be aspects that you're reading in terms of like, yay, yay, the feminine, whatever, where someone who's from the culture would be like, no, that's not how it would go. Right. It would go a little bit this, or like that maybe it went that way, but that's not great. There was a backlash to it afterwards. So always consult with somebody. And if they're telling you something that's like, will take you off, and like will change your project, consider it. consider it. Don't play the I have a PhD or don't play the I have my expertise card so quickly.
Yeah.
That's what I'll say. Like, okay, just so the framing is how will my game play in the gaming ecosystem, not necessarily the binary.
Right.
And
So
what
what happens if you do get to a point where you're like, well, I'll take that under consideration. So the story that I'm thinking of, by the way, is it so Shenouda of Atripa, he's an abbot of, I mean, that's not tell, he's the leader of a monastic federation in the 4th and 5th centuries in Egypt. And several letters indicate that he had issues with the nunnery that was part of his community. He visited them one time, to our knowledge, and tried to kind of like impose his will and got frustrated, and he like rent his garments in the manner of an Old Testament prophet to communicate biblically to them. And then one of them basically accused him of stripping and like sexual harassment, so he never came back, and like threatened to cut off their food, got mad they sent him clothes that didn't fit, wanted to prescribe punishments, wanted to be told about sins that were taking place in his community, but like maybe it seems pretty clear that the female leader did not necessarily want to tell him everything. And so, yes, there's a real historical precedent for all these things. But what I see and what somebody else sees may not be the same. That's true for any history you do.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, I mean, you have to think about like, where would that land? How would that, would people perceive that as disrespectful to one of the most important figures of the Coptic Church? And how much do I care about that?
I mean, yeah. So like, yes. So there, I mean, you're gonna enter criticism, right? And every game that has a historical message makes an argument. We call it argument for a reason. So you're gonna cause an argument with the argument that you make somehow, somewhere. The question is, that's why I like to ask the ecosystem question: is the argument that you're generating constructive and an actual discussion? And people can disagree, but then at least there's something that emerges from whatever disagreement is. Or is it frustrating? And what I find is there's a lot of games that are made that generate arguments that reduce the cultural conversation to this consistent 101, so like the original Puerto Rico. I'm gonna go back to that because that's just what I know. The original Puerto Rico. Once again, I'm not gonna talk about the working with a lay. I'm just gonna talk about my own reaction to it at first. Original Puerto Rico did not make any kind of fruitful arguments about colonization and slavery. What emerged from Puerto Rico was that the slaves were not to be counted. They did labor, they generated production, and they didn't get sick, they didn't get hurt, they didn't rebel, nobody dies, but nothing. So the argument, the conversation that is generated by that game doesn't. It's basically like, okay, should we call them colonists or slaves? And that is such a dumb conversation to me. It's sterile, and it's not the kinds of conversation that lead to greater understanding. To me, okay, this is Beyond Solitaire. I know I'm getting a little bit raw today, so it's fine.
No, I'm a free speech channel in that regard. Be raw, do it. Like, this is media. This is not puff pieces.
Yeah, to me, people who kind of talk about the colonization in Puerto Rico are engaging in a kind of trauma porn. They're thinking about it. They think the game deals with it. They think that the game kind of looks at it and, oh, this is a game that's brave enough to put, slaves, and it makes the players think and, whatever. And it's like, what kind of thinking are you doing? Are you doing something that increases understanding, or are you doing something that is kind of like self-congratulation? I'm going to explore my feelings and it's going to go nowhere. So that is, to me, masturbatory. Sorry.
So I actually really like this direction of conversation, though, because I think it really hits on something important about what games can and should be doing, what we can and should be doing through conversations. Actually, Geek Gamers was on here a few weeks ago. It will have been a few weeks ago by the time all this airs. And a lot of her points were about not asking yourself just a bunch of yes or no questions that land you in a narrative dead end, because it ruins the story. Yes. And I think, a lot of your earlier point, like when you were first getting into cultural consulting and talking about it, like with relation to like Frosthaven, for example, it's not just about, again, it's not, is it okay? It's how do we make this a more compelling story? Yes. How do we have this be a deeper and richer world? And I think that that's also true with historical gaming. Like, we like to think about history as a list of facts because that's what school teaches you to do, but all history is narrative. And if you trap yourself in a binary narrative, it's just not going to be as rich. It's just not going to be as good.
Right. And so I'll go back to making fun of white culture again, in the sense that, when you're privileged and you don't deal with on the ground or certain on the ground realities, you're middle class, you're enjoying this hobby and everything, then all conversations are fine. I can talk about whatever. I could have my tea and I could have my little circle and we could talk about whatever. And all conversations are kind of relativized and fine. And because at the end of the goal, the point of the conversation is the pleasure of the conversation. So like if it's a pleasurable conversation, that's fine. And okay, that's your paradigm. For us who are who have real stakes in a lot of these conversations, are like when it comes to colonization, it's not a 500-year-old reality that can just be talked about however.
Right.
For us, there's stakes. Any conversation about colonization that does not give insight into the ongoing colonization of folks is a harmful conversation, is a conversation that takes them away more than it gives. And so bridging that divide has been difficult because there's that ingrained sense that every conversation is worth it. And it's not. It's just not. And it's going to sound to people like, well, do you want to suppress speech? People just go there immediately. It's like, okay, well, it sounds like you want to, be the judge of what conversations are good or not. I know so much that happens so much. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to say that things are yes or no. I'm going to ask the genuine question of what's the point? Right. What is the point of the conversation? Is the point of the conversation the pleasure of the conversation? Have minds been changed? Have things been learned as a result of the conversation? I'm going to regard that as less valuable than actual arguments and conversations that lead to greater understanding and that ultimately adjust behavior. And that's what I want at the end of the day, because I want people to adjust their behavior, because we're not going to overcome colonization by talking about it. We need to get to that praxis point. We need to get to the action point of actually changing things. So to me, conversations about cultural conversations that are just kind of, oh, let's talk about this, and everything could generate any conversation and it's all valid and it's all good. No. I'm not going to say you can't have them, but I am going to criticize them. Criticism is not cancellation. I'm not canceling anything, but I am criticizing it.
Yeah. And I mean, I also think, you're perfectly within your rights to have a conversation that somebody else thinks is pointless. Like, nobody's saying you can't, right? But if you're putting that conversation out into like a larger discourse,
if you're baking it into a game,
you're inviting it,
right.
You're inviting a response. Right. This podcast invites responses. The fact that I tweet things, I just accept that on Twitter I'm going to get whatever response it is I get. Like, you can't, I mean, and I'm not saying like, oh, harassment is just what you get. No, that's not what I'm saying. But people don't have to like everything that we do or say. Nobody's required to like me. Nobody's required to like you. Like, it's like, that's not what anyone is saying.
What I will say is, I mean, interpret me properly.
Yeah. Give me fair shake.
Liking, not liking, whatever, you can like me or not likely, but when the persistent misinterpretations happen, that's where I'm going to get, frustrated. So like and that's why I, you see me pause every once in a while. I'll go down a line, but then I get the inner white person. Every PLC has an inner white person. We all do. Like it's our police. It's our internal police. We police ourselves because that's what keeps us safe. So I'll talk, and then I'll see the inner white person will like flash the stop sign, and I have to process, and I have to like, okay, is this worth saying or is this not worth saying? Can I say this in a way that will less likely bring blowback to me? And is it worth saying? So sometimes I'll get the police person and I won't say it because that's not, it won't be constructive. But I've learned over the years of doing this that there are some things that need to be said. And talking about white culture is one of those big flashing stop signs that my inner like white cop flashes at me, and it challenges me to be as clear as possible. But at the end of the day, I need to overcome that and talk about white culture, because white culture is ultimately why we're at where we're at. It's ultimately why, what is it? Top 400 board games, mostly made by white European men, to the tune of like over 90%. Elizabeth Hargrave just did this, but looking at the top 200 in BGG and counted like 8 titles from women. Why? Why?
Yeah.
And along the lines of POC, the similar distribution, we have to ask why questions, and the why questions are in white culture. They're in the way white folks are socialized. There's nothing inherent in it. There's nothing wrong with white people. I love white people. I'm talking to a white person right now.
Yeah, and like we are
And
real life friends. You are my friend.
yeah, and we're not going to talk about this all the time. Sometimes we just like goof off and talk about like fart jokes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like we're just happen to be talking about white culture now. So we need to overcome it and talk about what are the things in white culture that stop women from being more present, POC from being more present, LGBTQ to be more present. It's in white culture. It's in male culture, white male culture, I should say. You know, yeah.
White women have their own role to play in these things, but
okay,
yeah.
I mean, the white women have their own role to play, but like I still have, it's still not. You're still not at pole position. So no. I'm willing to kind of have those conversations. Again, not a binary. Right? I'm willing to have those. I think of it not in terms of the binary. I think in terms of center and margins. So who's in the center, who's in the margins? That's to me, that's obvious. From it's demographic who's the center, who's in the margins. I want to be able to ask why. So I want to ask these questions of white culture. And so bringing the whole conversation back to publishers. I'm a cultural consultant with publishers, and there's a lot in white culture. There's a lot in the way that white folks are socialized that I'm encountering. You know, we've mentioned some. We've mentioned the instinct for authority, the instinct that a white person doesn't like to be told they can't do something. Doesn't like to be told that they're not the right fit for every single role. You know, white folks don't like to be called racist. They don't like to even think that they're called racist. White folks make things about emotions and social stuff and want to take conversation away from some of the more material concerns that a POC might have. And, on down the line, right? There's a couple that we haven't even talked about. So, I mean, I don't want to like weigh down the conversation, but like, there's all these things.
And you don't need me to validate what you're saying, but I am going to say that it's true because, I mean, you're saying things that I see in myself. I fight them actively. I spot myself doing those things sometimes, like an appeal to authority or like being really scared that somebody is perceiving me as racist right now. Or, I mean, those are legitimate internal responses that I have. And I'm not going to lie about that. I think it's disingenuous to do that. I think that what I can do is recognize that it's there and process it to the best of my ability, get better at it. Just like I have anxiety. I go to therapy for that. We talk about recognizing the cues that I'm starting to spiral, how to stop, how to redirect. And I mean, like, I feel like it's a similar thing. Like, oh, I am being Karen-y right now. Let me pull that back. My inner Karen woke up. Let's acknowledge she's there in like the Buddhist fashion and just kind of like let her go.
There is one thing that I did want to hit this point. The other thing that white culture wants to do is forget. And this goes back to like this kind of hits back at some of the history stuff that we're talking about. Yes. White culture, it's the aphorism in amongst one of the indigenous tribes that I've been studying is the axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Because the axe wants to forget, because the axe doesn't want to think of itself as an axe. The axe wants to think of itself as nice. And the axe wants to think of itself as, okay, well, the forest is clear because the forest has always been clear and the forest should be clear. Like, no, you cut the forest.
Yeah.
And the idea that when POC speak, we're not trying to shame people. We're not trying to cut you down. We're just trying to be seen, and we're trying to reflect some of the accurate history that's been going on.
Yeah.
So that comes up whenever I hear a white person say, well, this used to be good, but all of a sudden people think it's bad. I get that from publishers a lot, where it's like, well, I've been making this for the whole time, and now people telling me it's bad. I remember I had one publisher, they were doing some kind of like fantasy game, and the tropes. And they said, okay, this particular faction was based on the Tauren from World of Warcraft. I don't know if you know anything about the Tauren from the World of Warcraft.
No.
Cow people, bulls and cows,
like
and
Minotaur types. Okay.
Yeah, Minotaur types, but like totally like native coded. They're sitting in teepees and they're cooking stuff on open fires, and they live, there's not big settlements and everything.
Okay.
We didn't know in 2010, quote unquote, we didn't know in 2010 when we were playing WoW, but now it's that in 2022. So from a white culture perspective, there's an all of a sudden there. All of a sudden the Tauren are racist. When they become racist, I don't know what's racist, what's not racist. And that's not because things changed, it was always racist, but the voices that have the life experience to be able to point out the racism have busted through the barriers. And now we can be heard more. Nothing changed. Nothing changed. Aunt Jemima was always racist. The Redskins was always racist. They've been protesting the Redskins since the 70s, the 80s.
Yeah.
But those voices just never penetrated. So that's another thing that I want to encourage in terms of publishers. If someone points out something and your instinct is to say, "Well, that wasn't racist before," you're probably speaking from a perspective that likes to forget, and now we're not letting you forget. So just, again, you still have the choice. You can put it out and live with the blowback, or if your intention is to reach the broadest possible audience, don't say to segments of that audience, "Oh, well, you're woke, calm down." I'm not trying to shame people. I'm trying to be constructive here. I want a truly multicultural space. And I do think there are large aspects of why culture need to be deconstructed in order to truly make room for that multicultural space. That's what this is about. This isn't about attacking people. So all the stuff that we were talking about, I know I pinned something there at the end, but I needed to get the forgetting part in there. Yeah. All the stuff we've talked about are tendencies within white culture. They can be challenged, they can be overcome. And I invite people of goodwill, all publishers. I find most publishers are of goodwill. The vast majority that I've worked with are of goodwill. I invite everyone of goodwill, publisher and gamer, to criticism, understand that criticism is not cancellation. I have real reasons for this. Please do not interpret me uncharitably. I'm not trying to cause trouble.
Yes, you are. Good trouble.
Good trouble. I'm trying to cause good trouble. Yes. So it's trouble for the idea, but good for the person. Hopefully, ultimately that's where my cultural consulting is all about.
Yes, absolutely. And as the person who is your interlocutor here, I'm personally trying to see this as, it's not, the tree remembers, the axe forgets. Now it's your turn to be a tree, and it's somebody else's turn to be the axe. That's
right.
Not
the people perceive that I'm taking the axe, and I'm taking the axe to white people. I am truly trying to deconstruct the paradigm, and I hope that the Puerto Rico is the first shot across the bow on that, where it's like people assume that I wanted to cancel Puerto Rico. Never. Yeah. Never. I just want to make it like more accessible, more people, and I want more games. So like, if you want to understand Puerto Rican colonization, from different perspectives, my friend Julio Nazario made Borican. Is a game
GMT.
That is on GMT, but it's not funded yet. Like, it's not. Hasn't hit its 500 pre-orders. It needs to 500 pre-orders. So we're still working on it. So if you really want to know about Puerto Rican, the more difficult colonization stuff, then that's a good project. And just like more. Don't jam something that has a bad message up our butts. Just let go and embrace something that's more resonant with the culture. That's it. So that's where I'm at.
Absolutely. I just checked, by the way. Weekend is at 337 orders. It's got to get to 500 of 55.
Gotta get to 500. It's hard.
But yes, so let those who have ears to listen, let them do so. And so where can you be found online?
Shelf Stories GBL on Twitter. My YouTube channel, Shelf Stories. I'm not as active posting because I'm working on some projects. So also shelfstorygbl.com is my cultural consulting website, but you can you can contact me all sorts of ways. You contact me, through Twitter, YouTube, Popesixtus, username BGG. You can if you want me to take a look at your game, and I try to be. I give your game a lot of time. I'm very thorough. I try to make sure that people get their money's worth when they do consulting with me. So the big project, and I can announce this because but the publishers don't care. I am signed. Money's in the bank, and contract has been signed. I'm now going to be a designer. I'm designing my first game, a co-design with Greg Loring Albright, who made Ahoy, and who was a guest on both of our shows. And we are doing the board game version of Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. So if you don't, and this actually this audience would know that because it's a history audience. So I've met a lot of people who are like, "What's that?" which to me is crazy. Like, so that book is like, Pearl Jam talked about it during a concert. Rage Against the Machine has it on their website for sale, and all this other stuff. So it is a book that has penetrated the culture. If you don't know, it is a alternate telling of history from the perspective of dissidents, rebels, strikes and protests, and all the people that push the government to do certain things. In the normal histories, governments just do stuff. And, it's like, okay, it's time to release the slaves and it's time to have civil rights. Not quite. There were popular movements that pushed power to, like, the abolitionists pushed the end of slavery, and, escaping slaves pushed the end of slavery. And, in the civil rights era, it was Black activists and women activists and eventually the Native American activists that pushed more civil rights, and more, like, this stuff doesn't happen, just on its own. And so people's history wants to tell that story. And our challenge is to turn a giant 500-year, 500-page textbook into a fun board game. But I think we are on the right track. I showed you a little bit of the beginnings. You seem to approve, at least
I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So that's going to be, so if I'm not like producing as much video content, then that's what I'm working on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on. As always, Jason, I love having you on the show.
Thank you very much, Liz.
So those of you out there, if you're listening, you probably know I can be found anywhere as Beyond Solitaire. So please like, subscribe, comment, ask questions, and most of all, happy gaming.
Later, everybody.